I changed my outfit 3 times before she got there. I was 68 years old, standing in my bedroom, pulling a blouse over my head, and then taking it right back off, because somewhere in the back of my mind I was already hearing what she'd say. Not what she might say. What she would say. That pause she had. That little tilt of the head. I put on the first blouse, took it off, put on the second one, stood in front of the mirror for a minute, and then I thought I need to wear the blue one. The blue one was safer. That's the word I used, safer. I was 68 years old, getting dressed for another woman's comfort. My name is Loretta. People used to call me Rhett when I was young. I'm 89 now. I haven't thought about that name in a long time. Rhett, like something from another life. I've been sitting with something lately, not sure how to say it out loud. I've tried a few times and it comes out wrong, either too angry or too soft. So I'm just going to say it plain and let it land where it lands. I had a friend, I'll call her Clara. I had a friend named Clara for nearly 30 years. We met at a church auxiliary meeting sometime in the late 60s. She brought a lemon cake with powdered sugar on top, and I told her it was the best thing I'd eaten in a month, which was the truth. And she laughed and said I clearly hadn't been eating enough, which I later learned was just how she said thank you. We were close, real close, I thought. She was at my kitchen table more mornings than I can count. We talked about everything, our children, our husbands, our worries, the neighbors. She had opinions about everything, and she gave them freely, and I thought for a long time that was just who she was. But there was always something. She'd say things like, "Oh, Rhett, that haircut suits you. You can pull off things that most women can't." And I'd smile. And she'd look at me just a half second longer than she needed to, and then she'd look away. Or she'd sit in my living room and say, "You know, you could really open this space up if you moved that cabinet." I hadn't asked. I'd lived in that house for 20 years and not once thought the cabinet was wrong until she mentioned it. Small things, each one small. Small enough to talk yourself out of. She means well. That's what I told myself. That's just Clara. She's particular. That's how she loves. My husband Wallace, he was a quiet man. Not distant, just quiet. He watched people the way you watch water patient, like he knew something was moving underneath that you couldn't see yet. He had a habit of standing in doorways. Not leaning, just standing, arms loose at his sides, like he hadn't decided yet whether he was coming in or going out. I used to tease him about it, said he was always halfway somewhere. He'd just smile and not move. We'd been married 30-some years by then, and Wallace had never said a word against Clara, not once. He wasn't that kind of man. But one evening Clara had been over for most of the afternoon, and after she left I was tidying up the kitchen, and I noticed Wallace standing in the doorway, that same doorway, arms at his sides, just watching me, not saying anything. I said, "What?" And he said, "Nothing, you just look tired." And I said I was fine. And he said, "You don't look tired from working. You look tired from something else." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. But that night I thought about it. I thought about the afternoon, what we'd talked about, how I'd felt when she was there, how I felt now, and I couldn't name anything specific. No argument, no unkind word, nothing I could point to. Just this feeling like I'd been standing at attention for 4 hours, and only now been allowed to sit down. I went to sleep and didn't think about it again for a while, but it kept happening. Not in ways I could explain, in ways I could only feel. I started painting, this was in my early 70s, just something to do with my hands. Someone at the senior center was teaching a watercolor class on Tuesday mornings, and I went mostly because Tuesdays were long, and I needed somewhere to put them. I was not good at painting. I want to be clear about that. The flowers I painted looked like the weather, not like flowers. The birds I tried had no feet, but I liked it. I liked sitting at the table with the little cups of color and the brush and the quiet. It felt like mine. I told Clara about it, and she said, "Oh, that's wonderful." My cousin started painting in her 60s. She said it's very therapeutic even if you don't have a natural eye for it. Even if you don't have a natural eye for it. I stood in front of the mirror the next time Clara was coming over. Same bedroom, same mirror. I had on the blouse I wanted to wear. And I heard her voice in my head before she'd opened her mouth, that pause, that tilt, and I stood there for a moment. Then I left it on, went anyway. When she made a comment, nothing cruel, just that look, that half second, I said, "I know, I like it," and I looked right at her when I said it. She moved on, didn't make anything of it, but something in me had shifted, quiet as a door easing closed, not fixed, not over, just the first small thing I'd taken back. After that, I started noticing how many things I'd been doing her way without knowing it. The color I'd painted the back bedroom, I'd changed it after she mentioned it looked dark. The rose bush I'd pulled out because she said it crowded the walkway. The way I'd stopped serving certain dishes when she came over, because once, years ago, she'd said they were heavy for summer. None of it on its own, all of it together. I kept going to the Tuesday class, kept painting, but I stopped telling Clara about it. And when you stop sharing things with someone, the friendship gets smaller. I stopped telling her about the painting, then about my daughter's visits, then about the new chair I'd bought for the porch. Each thing I stopped telling her was a door I closed quietly, and eventually there were more closed doors than open ones. Wallace passed about 2 years after that. I don't talk about that year much. Not the grief. The grief was expected in its way. What I wasn't prepared for was something quieter than grief. Wallace was the only person who had ever watched me and said nothing, just watched. The way he stood in doorways, patient, like something was worth waiting for. When he was gone, I realized I had been seen by exactly one person my whole life, and now I wasn't. That's when Clara became dangerous. Not because she changed, because I had nothing left to balance her against. The 3-pack of soap Wallace had bought the week before, 2 bars left on the bathroom shelf, shrink wrap still on them. I didn't want to use them, didn't want to throw them away, so I looked at them every morning while I brushed my teeth. For a long time, he wore the same 3 flannel shirts from October through March. Brown, dark green, a faded red one with a small tear near the second button he'd meant to fix for years. I washed them all in November habit. Not thinking, folded them, put them back in the drawer, then stood there with my hand on the drawer for a minute before I closed it. That winter was the longest I remember. Clara came around more during those months, sitting with me, bringing food, checking in. I was grateful in the beginning, but somewhere in that year, she started having opinions about things she'd never had opinions about before. My house, my eating, whether I should look into moving somewhere smaller. You really should think about downsizing, Rhett. A house this size for one person, and I'd nod. Have you thought about what you'll do if the stairs get to be too much? And I'd nod. I worry about you alone up here. And every time she said that I worry about you, I felt something in me close like a fist. Not because it wasn't kind, because it wasn't a question. It was a verdict dressed up as concern. And there was something else. When I told her that my youngest daughter had called to say she was coming for a whole week, something I'd waited for without saying I was waiting, Clara said, "Oh, that'll be nice." Those visits can be a lot, though. You might be exhausted by day 3. I was standing in my kitchen holding the phone. My daughter was coming. My daughter, who I hadn't seen properly in 3 years. And the first response was a warning. I didn't say anything to Clara that day. I said something like, "We'll see," and I got off the phone and sat down at the kitchen table, and I thought about all the times over all the years that I had walked away from her feeling smaller than when I arrived. That was the first time I used that word, even just to myself. Smaller. A few months later, a young woman moved in down the road. She knocked on my door one afternoon with a container of food, said she'd made too much, which I knew wasn't true because you can tell by how someone says it, whether they made extra or they made it on purpose. I asked her in. Her name was Nadia. She sat down at my table and she didn't offer any opinions. She asked me about the watercolors on the wall. Not how long have you been painting or did you take a class, she just said, "Tell me about these." So I did. I told her about the Tuesday mornings. I told her about the flowers that looked like weather. And she laughed, not polite, but real, surprised. And she said, "These are yours." You can tell, not good. Not for someone without a natural eye. Just yours. I didn't say anything back. I just sat there for a moment with that sentence. Nobody had looked at something I made and simply let it belong to me in a very long time. Over the next year, Nadia knocked on my door more times than I could count. Sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit. She didn't come to get anything. She didn't come to give advice. When I slipped in the hallway one morning, nothing serious, I caught myself on the wall, but I was shaken enough that I sat down on the floor for a minute. I mentioned it to Nadia the next time I saw her. She didn't make a face, didn't say anything about the stairs. She said, "Can I leave my number somewhere you can find it easily? Not because anything's wrong. I'd just like you to have it." She put it on a piece of paper and folded it and set it under the little dish on my hall table where I keep my keys. It's still there. I saw less and less of Clara after that. Not because of a fight, just because when you stop leaning toward something, you drift. She called me once last spring. We talked for maybe 15 minutes about nothing in particular. When I hung up, I realized I didn't feel anything at all. Not relief, not sadness, not that tired feeling I used to get. Just nothing. Like putting down something you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it had any weight. I have fewer people in my life now than I've had since I was young. Maybe 4 people I'd call without thinking twice. That number used to bother me. But I think about Wallace standing in that kitchen doorway, arms loose at his sides, that patient look. You don't look tired from working. You look tired from something else. He saw it before I did. He just waited for me to see it too. My daughter came for that week. Day 3 arrived and I was not exhausted. We sat up past midnight 2 nights in a row. On her last morning, she looked at the watercolors on the wall and said, "Mom, these got better." I looked at them, really looked. She was right. I hadn't noticed. I still go to the Tuesday class. The flowers still look more like weather than flowers. But the birds have feet now, most of them. This morning I got dressed without thinking, pulled on the first thing I touched, didn't stand in front of the mirror, didn't hear anyone's voice. Took me until I was sitting down with my tea to notice I'd done it. 89 years old. Took me that long. I painted a new one last week, A small square of blue, a tree in the corner, a bird with probably the wrong number of toes. I hung it in the hallway, right above where Nadia's number sits under my key dish. I stood there for a minute looking at it. Then I went and got my tea.